I never thought that a simple video message from my grandson would end up being the final crack in everything I had built. The phone buzzed in my hand. It was from Tyler, my sweet, quiet grandson who never caused trouble. I tapped to play. The screen lit up with a recording that made my heart tighten before a single word was even spoken. There was Melanie, my daughter, my only child. She stood in the center of her pristine kitchen, the one I paid for, surrounded by her friends. I recognized the gleaming marble countertops, the imported Italian light fixtures I had covered when she couldn't afford them. My money had made this house what it was. And yet, there she stood, laughing as if I were nothing more than a joke. "Oh, please, she's dead weight," Melanie said, her voice sharp with mockery. "I mean, what would she even do if she wasn't living here? She's basically just a guest in her own grave at this point." Laughter followed, cruel, thoughtless. One of her friends even chimed in. "Well, at least you're doing your good deed, letting her stay, right?" "Exactly," Melanie replied, grinning. "I pay for everything anyway." I felt my throat close. She was lying, but that wasn't what stung the most. It was hearing her describe me like I was some relic she tolerated out of pity. A useless old woman clinging to her generosity. She had no idea how wrong she was. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my face remained blank, calm. I knew better than to let my emotions spill over. That's how she controlled me, feeding off my hurt, turning every protest into more ammunition against me. I stared at her frozen image on the screen. This woman, my daughter, who for years had come to me in tears, begging for help when the bills piled up, 8 years of mortgage payments I made, credit card debts I quietly paid down, groceries, school fees, the roof repairs. I had given everything without once keeping a tally, without once demanding thanks. All I asked for was a small guest suite in the house I saved. And yet, here we were, dead weight. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. The betrayal didn't surprise me anymore. Not really. But hearing it so boldly, so publicly, that was the final cut. She wasn't just ungrateful. She was building her own narrative, one where I was the dependent leech. My fingers moved slowly as I saved the video to a private folder. Not for confrontation, not yet, but for later. I would need it. I took a deep breath and turned my gaze toward the spotless kitchen around me. I had paid for every inch of this house, but suddenly, it didn't feel like home at all. There was no tear in my eye, no scream in my throat, just a heavy, growing coldness. Something had shifted inside me, like a door clicking shut. I wiped my hands dry, turned off the phone, and walked calmly toward my room. My movements were slow, deliberate, almost serene. The storm had already started. But this time, I would be the one steering it. Hours have passed since I watched that video, but the heaviness in my chest hasn't eased. I sit by the window in my guest suite, or as Melanie so graciously calls it, the little corner I let Mom have. The house is beautiful. I made sure of that. White pillars, tall windows, polished floors that shine like they belong in a magazine spread. 8 years ago, when Melanie's marriage crumbled and the bank threatened foreclosure, she called me crying, desperate. I didn't hesitate. I cashed out my retirement savings, sold my small condo, and handed her the down payment to save this house. Back then, she promised, "It'll be your home too, Mom, always, always." That word feels like a bitter joke now. For 8 years, I've lived here quietly, never demanding anything. I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, covered repairs, when the plumbing failed, when the roof leaked, when the air conditioner broke down in the middle of July. I told myself I was doing what any mother would do, protecting my family, protecting my grandson. I never asked for rent, never made demands. All I wanted was to be part of their lives, to see Tyler grow up. I kept to myself in this guest suite, cooked when asked, helped when needed, and made myself small whenever Melanie's tone hinted that my presence was a lot. And yet, every year, the distance grew. The warmth faded. Her gratitude turned into silent expectation. My support became invisible, as if my quiet contributions weren't worthy of recognition anymore. Outside, the trimmed hedges sway in the breeze. I remember planting some of those shrubs myself when the landscaper she couldn't afford bailed on the job. It's funny how quickly people forget who dug the roots. The irony is, I never needed to live here. I was doing fine before Melanie pulled me into her storm of debts and tears. But I couldn't say no to my daughter, not when she was desperate, not when she clutched my hand and said, "Please, Mom, I can't do this alone." I look around this room now. My suite, a single bedroom, a small sitting area, a bathroom tucked into the corner. Melanie made sure to remind me often how generous it was to give me this space. Generous. No, Melanie. What you call generosity was my sacrifice. My money. My safety net. My freedom. But I never corrected her. I let her tell the story the way she needed to believe it. It was easier. Quieter. Now, though? Now I see it for what it is. I lean back, folding my hands over my lap, steadying the storm inside me. Dead weight. I whisper the words under my breath, tasting their bitterness one last time. No, not anymore. The dead weight is about to rise. The next morning, I found myself at the church community center, folding clothes for the charity drive. The soft murmur of conversations and the gentle clatter of donation bins felt oddly comforting. At least here, people spoke with kindness, or at least pretended to. That's more than I get at home. Margaret noticed me sorting through winter coats and walked over with that concerned smile of hers. She's always had a way of sensing when something's off, even when I try to hide it. "You've been awfully generous to Melanie all these years, Evelyn," she said gently, glancing sideways at me. "I don't think many would have given as much as you have." I gave her a small smile and waved it off, as I always do. "Oh, you know how it is with children. You do what you can." But inside, her words landed like small stones in my stomach. Generous. That word again. People say it like it's a virtue. As if generosity is something that flows naturally, endlessly, without cost to the one giving. As if it didn't cost me my entire retirement, my independence, my sense of self. As if it didn't chip away at me year after year. As I sat quietly while Melanie made decisions with my money like it was hers, Margaret continued softly, "You know, Evelyn, you've done more than most parents would. Don't let her make you feel like you owe her anything." I met her eyes for a moment and saw something rare there. Not pity, but recognition. She knew. Maybe not the details, but enough to sense it. "I don't feel owed," I lied smoothly. "I've always been happy to help." She touched my arm gently, her voice dropping. "Even help has limits, my dear." I swallowed hard and forced a polite chuckle. "I'll keep that in mind." But as I turned back to the clothes, my fingers trembled slightly against the worn fabric. I felt the familiar ache creeping in, that gnawing sense that I had allowed too much for too long. For years, I convinced myself that Melanie's sharpness was just stress, that her dismissiveness was temporary, that her coldness would thaw with time. After all, wasn't she once my little girl who held my hand during thunderstorms? The one who clung to me after her divorce, crying that I was the only one who ever stayed? But those moments feel distant now, like faded photographs buried at the bottom of a drawer. What remains is her sharp tongue, her entitlement, her calculated dependency. I glanced at Margaret again as she continued sorting. She had no idea that last night I watched my daughter mock me like I was some relic to be tolerated. And yet, hearing Margaret say the words out loud, "You've done enough," planted a strange calm in me. She was right. I had done enough. And from now on, enough would be exactly what I give. That evening, I barely made it through dinner before Melanie dropped her newest performance. We sat at the long dining table, just the two of us. Tyler was at his friend's house. The silence was heavy, but she finally broke it, swirling the wine in her glass like she was preparing herself to say something delicate. I already knew that tone. I braced myself. "So," she began, drawing out the word like a string, "we've decided to host a little dinner party next weekend. Some of my business contacts and their wives." She flashed a bright smile, one practiced for guests, not meant for me. I kept my face neutral, nodding. That sounds lovely. She leaned forward slightly, as if what she was about to say was perfectly reasonable. It's a bit upscale, though. We want everything to be perfect. You understand. Her voice softened. So, I think it's best if you stay in your suite during the party, just so everything flows smoothly. The words stung, but I kept my expression still. My hands stayed neatly folded in my lap, my voice even. Of course, she smiled, relieved, as if my quiet compliance was expected. I knew you'd understand. She sipped her wine. You know how these people can be judgmental. I don't want anyone making assumptions about our situation. Our situation. That's what I had become. A situation. I stared at her for a moment, taking in the soft glow of the chandelier I paid for, the polished wood table I purchased, the designer chairs I selected and financed when she couldn't afford them. The entire house was my unacknowledged gift, and yet here I was, an inconvenience to be hidden. She went on chatting about the caterer and floral arrangements, completely unbothered. I listened quietly. I've learned that silence unsettles her more than any argument ever could. She doesn't see me as family anymore. Not really. I'm a silent occupant in the guest wing, tolerated but excluded. My role, apparently, was to fund the dream while fading into the background. I stood up slowly once she finished rambling about the wine list. If you'll excuse me, I'll head to my room. Of course, Mom, she said, with a sweet smile. Thank you for being so understanding. As I walked back to my suite, my steps were steady, but inside, something shifted. A quiet resolve settled deeper into my bones. She believes she's in control. She's been convinced for years that my silence means acceptance, that my willingness to help was endless. But I've seen enough. If Melanie thinks I'm dead weight, then she won't have to carry me much longer. She won't be carrying anything at all soon. The next morning, I left the house early. Melanie wouldn't notice. She was already consumed with party preparations and her endless calls with the caterer. Her focus was entirely on impressing people who wouldn't even remember her name a week later. I, however, had a different appointment. The small law office sat quietly at the corner of Main and Willow. Old brick, ivy creeping up the side. I'd been here before, but never for something like this. The receptionist greeted me with polite warmth and led me straight in. Good morning, Evelyn, Mr. Aldridge said, rising from behind his tidy desk. He was a soft-spoken man, mid-60s, the kind of lawyer who preferred facts over theatrics, exactly the kind of man I needed. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, I said, settling into the chair across from him. Of course, you sounded determined. I allowed a small smile. I am. He opened a fresh folder in front of him, pen poised. You mentioned you'd like to make some updates to your estate plan? Yes. My voice was steady. I want everything transferred into a trust. Irrevocable. And I want my daughter's name removed entirely. No access, no authority. He blinked, but didn't react beyond a subtle raise of his brow. All right. May I ask what prompted the change? I thought briefly of the video still sitting in my phone, of Melanie's laughter echoing in my ears. But I only said, it's time to secure my own future. He nodded once, as if that was all he needed. And your grandson? Do you wish to name him as beneficiary? I hesitated for a moment. Tyler was different. Still young, still impressionable, still under his mother's shadow. But he was the one who sent me the video. The one who saw enough to feel something was wrong. Yes, I said softly, but with conditions. Not until he's older, 25, and with oversight until then. Mr. Aldridge made a few notes, then looked up. This will require moving your financial accounts, property title, and insurance policies under the trust's control. It will also prevent any claims of undue influence later. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. He nodded, then offered a faint, knowing smile. You're being very thorough, Mrs. Harper. I've been patient long enough, I replied calmly. Now I'll be careful. As I signed the initial documents, a strange peace settled over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't sacrificing. I was planning. Melanie had no idea a shift had begun. She still saw me as the quiet, aging mother who would always nod and oblige. Let her keep believing that, for now. By late afternoon, I was back home, sitting quietly in the garden. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawn, the same lawn I paid landscapers to save when Melanie couldn't afford them anymore. The roses bloomed neatly in their beds, but even they felt hollow to me now, pretty, polished, maintained, like everything in this house. On the surface, flawless. Beneath it, rot. I pulled my sweater tighter as the breeze cooled. My thoughts wandered to the years that brought me here. The nights I sat with Tyler as a baby while Melanie sobbed herself to sleep after the divorce. The countless times she came to me, desperate, helpless, as debts mounted, as her credit cards were maxed, as the bank threatened to seize this house. And I came. I always came. My savings, my security, my peace. I handed it all over, quietly, willingly, because that's what a mother does. I raised her. Then, after her husband left, I raised her again, and her son. Even after all I had done, somehow the narrative changed. In Melanie's mind, I had become dependent on her. The first time she made that sly comment at a dinner party. Well, we've made space for Mom, you know. Since she needed somewhere to go, I laughed it off. Everyone did. But the words stayed with me like tiny thorns under my skin, and they kept coming. Little jabs wrapped in smiles, subtle reminders that I lived in her house, that she was being generous, that without her, I'd have nowhere to go. As if she didn't know every inch of this property existed, because I'd emptied my accounts to save it. I glanced up as Melanie's voice rang faintly from inside. She was pacing through the kitchen, rattling off instructions to a florist on the phone, completely absorbed in her latest grand display for people who'd barely remember her name. She never even noticed that I didn't pay last month's mortgage. She still thought I was quietly handling it, like always. I let out a slow breath, that old gnawing ache in my chest, the one that used to whisper it's your job to keep the peace, was losing its voice. I've done enough. I whispered the words to the roses, as if saying them aloud would help them take root inside me. I had given her everything she needed to stand on her own, and now it was time she learned what standing alone really means. For the next several days, I moved carefully, quietly. Melanie was too busy to notice. The party consumed her every waking moment. Menu changes, floral arrangements, seating charts. She barely registered my presence, other than the occasional barked request or condescending, "Mother, can you just handle that later?" I let her think I was still managing the finances, still wiring payments, still bailing her out like always. But each morning, after Tyler left for school and Melanie drove off to meet with planners, I sat alone at the small desk in my suite. My movements were methodical, steady. I opened each account, the investment portfolio, the remaining savings, the secondary property Melanie didn't even know I owned across town. All of it, slowly consolidated, secured, and transferred into the trust. Mr. Aldridge was efficient, discreet. Every document arrived by private courier. I signed and returned them quietly, while Melanie was out flaunting herself to people who would soon disappear, like all the others before them. And then there was the safe deposit box. One afternoon, while Melanie spent hours at the spa perfecting herself for her precious dinner party, I made my way to the bank. The box had sat untouched for years, filled with papers I never thought I'd need. My late husband's insurance payouts, old property deeds, personal certificates, and copies of every major payment I ever made toward this house. Every mortgage check, every tax statement, every repair invoice, all signed in my name. Proof. The kind of proof Melanie assumed didn't exist. I sorted it all meticulously, placing copies into a separate sealed folder marked Control Documents. If this ever escalated into legal threats, I wouldn't be caught fumbling for records. By the time I returned home, the sun was setting. Melanie barely acknowledged me as I slipped through the door. She was perched on the couch, animatedly chatting on speakerphone with one of her wealthy guests, laughing that hollow laugh I had come to know so well. "She's just so low maintenance," I heard her say into the phone, clearly talking about me. "Honestly, it's not a big deal having her here. She keeps herself busy, helps out a bit. Really no trouble at all." I stood silently by the stairs, listening. My chest tightened, but not with sadness this time. With clarity. Low maintenance. That's what I had become. A non-entity. A fixture to her. As passive as the antique lamp she liked to boast about. The one I gifted her from my mother's estate. But lamps don't carry debt. Lamps don't fund mortgages. Lamps don't wake at night, worrying whether the daughter they sacrificed for will ever show an ounce of respect. And unlike a lamp, I had a choice. Melanie still believed she owned the narrative. Soon, she would learn otherwise. The brunch was her latest display. Melanie invited some of her closest friends, the same polished circle who always hovered around her like flies to sugar when she flashed signs of wealth. I stayed silent as I helped prepare the spread that morning, as usual. She offered no thanks, just directions. "Could you make sure the pastries are warmed, Mother? And don't forget to stay in the guest suite once everyone arrives. We want this to feel elegant, not cramped." I nodded. I always nodded. It was what she expected. What they all expected. But I didn't leave the room once the guests arrived. Instead, I lingered quietly by the edge of the dining area, unnoticed, as conversation flowed freely, champagne glasses clinked, and self-important laughter filled the room. One of her friends, a woman named Valerie, leaned in after complimenting the house. "I just love what you've done here, Melanie. Truly impressive, considering you know everything." Melanie smiled, sipping her mimosa, her voice perfectly casual. "Oh, you know how it is. Took a lot of work. And of course, it helps that I took over everything. Mom can't really handle finances anymore. It's been a lot." She let out a theatrical sigh. "I mean, she's getting older. And honestly, she won't be around much longer anyway." The words slid out of her mouth like nothing. A joke. A little jab to amuse her audience. Laughter followed. Uneasy, but present. I stood still, watching her. My pulse quickened, but my face remained unreadable. Melanie didn't even glance my way. She hadn't seen me standing behind the archway. She won't be around much longer anyway. As if I were already fading. As if I were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience to outlast. I saw Valerie glance toward me briefly, her smile faltering as she noticed I was there. She nudged Melanie's arm gently, whispering something. Melanie turned, startled, spotting me for the first time. "Oh, Mother, I didn't see you standing there," she said quickly, her voice laced with mock surprise. "We were just talking about how grateful we are that you're still here with us." I smiled softly. "Of course." My voice was calm, even kind, but inside, something shifted deeper. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. For years, I believed that love was enough to excuse her sharpness. That family meant tolerating the cuts, as long as the whole structure held together. But love, without respect? That's not love. It's convenience. I glanced around at her guests, people who laughed politely at my expense, knowing full well who funded the roof above their heads today. Let them laugh. Let them think I'm fading quietly into the background. The show was almost over. After the brunch, I went back to my suite and sat in silence for a long time. Her words echoed in my mind. She won't be around much longer anyway. I stared at the stack of bills on my desk. The mortgage payment was due in 2 days. The payment I had automatically covered for 8 years without fail. Melanie never even asked anymore. She assumed the bank drafts would continue. Like clockwork, because that's what I always did. Until now. I reached for my phone, logged into the bank account, and quietly canceled the automatic transfer. The cancellation confirmation blinked on the screen. Just a few simple clicks. That was it. It felt strange how easy it was to stop after all these years. Like slicing through a thin string I once thought was a steel cable. For once, Melanie would feel the weight of this house entirely on her own shoulders. She wouldn't notice immediately. She was too busy playing hostess, too busy preparing for her lavish dinner party. But the silence of that canceled payment would begin to speak for me soon enough. That evening, we crossed paths in the hallway. She was on her phone, barking orders about wine pairings and centerpieces. She barely acknowledged me as I passed. "Oh, Mother," she said offhandedly, covering the mouthpiece with her hand for a moment. "Could you remind me to check on the mortgage account tomorrow?" There was some silly notice that came through the mail. Probably a clerical error. I smiled softly, keeping my voice steady. "Of course, dear. I'll make a note." She grinned, satisfied, and returned to her call. That was always the pattern, wasn't it? She delegated. I handled it. She avoided responsibility while I carried it, quietly absorbing her debts and her carelessness. Not anymore. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I stood by my window, watching the warm glow of the house I saved, the house I protected, the house she weaponized against me. For years, I told myself that keeping peace was worth any sacrifice, that biting my tongue kept the family intact. But in truth, it only emboldened her. Quiet doesn't mean weak. I know that now. The first domino had fallen today. Quietly, calmly. The others would follow soon enough. It didn't take long. 2 days later, as I trimmed the hydrangeas near the front walk, Melanie burst out of the house. She moved quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the stone path. The tension in her voice was thinly disguised under the same sweet tone she always used when she needed something. "Mother, have you spoken to the bank?" she asked, adjusting her sunglasses like it was a casual chat. "I got a call this morning about the mortgage payment being late. They must have made some kind of mistake." I stood, wiping my gardening gloves on my jeans, and met her gaze calmly. "No mistake," she blinked. "What do you mean?" "The payment didn't go through." I nodded. "I know, I stopped it." For a moment she froze. Just a split-second crack in her polished face before she pulled herself together. "You stopped it? Why would you do that?" Her voice tightened, but she was still trying to keep it light, performative. After all, she couldn't be seen scolding her mother out in the open. I kept my voice even. "Because I no longer feel comfortable managing your obligations." Her lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't quite process the words. "My obligations?" she repeated, her voice pitching upward. "Mother, we've always handled this together. You said you wanted to help. You said you'd take care of the finances." "I did," I answered softly. "For 8 years, quietly, without complaint. But now, I've decided it's no longer my responsibility." I could see it, the flicker of panic that rushed beneath her attempt at control. But the payments are due. The party is this weekend. I can't deal with this right now." I said nothing. She let out a sharp exhale. "Mother, please don't do this right now. You're making things complicated." I smiled gently, my voice still calm, still steady. "No, Melanie, I've simply returned your house to your control." She stared at me, lips tightening, eyes narrowing as the weight of those words began to sink in. Control. She never thought she'd lose it. For years, she assumed my help was infinite, automatic, hers to command. Not anymore. She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but no words came. She turned sharply, marching back inside, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, breathing in the soft evening air. The first cracks had formed, small, but undeniable. And unlike her fragile decorations and forced smiles, these cracks would only spread. The house was quieter the next morning. Melanie barely spoke as she passed me in the kitchen. Her usual condescending brightness had dulled, replaced by tight, forced smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Good. She was starting to feel it. Tyler sat at the breakfast counter, scrolling through his phone. He glanced at me with that same softness he's always had, a quiet awareness most adults miss. "Morning, Grandma," he said. "Morning, sweetheart." My voice was light, steady. Melanie cleared her throat and chimed in. "Mother, after Tyler leaves for school, can we talk? Just us." I nodded once. Of course. After Tyler left, she waited until she heard the front door click shut before she turned to me, arms crossed, voice low and clipped. I don't know what's going on with you lately, but this isn't fair. You're making everything harder for everyone. I set my teacup down and met her eyes. I've simply stepped back, Melanie. Her voice sharpened. You know we have expenses. You know how much the mortgage is. You're creating unnecessary stress for all of us. I let the words settle between us before I spoke. Do you remember when you first called me crying after the divorce, when you begged me to help save this house? You said you didn't want Tyler to lose his home. She shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I didn't hesitate then. I continued, voice calm but firm. I poured every dime I had into saving this place. I paid the mortgage, the taxes, the repairs, year after year. And not once, Melanie, not once did you offer to take on even a portion of it. Her face flushed. I was going through a hard time. I had Tyler to raise. My business was just getting started. And I understood that. I never complained. But now you sit in that living room, surrounded by things I paid for, speaking about me like I'm some charity case you've taken in. Her eyes widened. She wasn't prepared for my tone. I leaned forward slightly, my voice softer but heavier. You called me dead weight. Her mouth opened, ready to deny it, but I raised my hand gently, stopping her. You may not have said it to my face, I continued, but you said it. And you meant it. She froze, lips trembling slightly. For years, I thought enduring her dismissiveness was a form of love. That patience was strength. But it wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear of losing what little connection I had left to her. Not anymore. The words were out, and I felt lighter, clearer. I stood, smoothing my sweater. I won't be your silent servant anymore, Melanie. I've carried my weight long enough. Her face was pale as I walked away, leaving her in the heavy, growing silence. The days that followed moved with a different rhythm. I could feel Melanie watching me now, not with her usual distracted indifference, but with suspicion. She knew something had shifted, but she couldn't quite grasp it yet, and I didn't give her any clues. While she scrambled to rearrange finances for her party, I quietly finalized my preparations. At the lawyer's office, Mr. Aldridge slid the final stack of papers toward me. His tone remained as calm as ever, but even he couldn't hide a hint of respect in his eyes. Everything is complete, Mrs. Harper. The trust is fully active. Your assets, financial, property, insurance, are all protected, legally separated from any future claims. I nodded, signing the last document with steady hands. And Melanie? She has no legal access. None whatsoever. He paused. Even if she attempted to contest, she'd have no grounds. You've built a very secure wall. I allowed myself a small breath. Good. He folded the documents into a leather portfolio, carefully placing them inside. You've been very strategic, Evelyn. Most wait too long. I waited long enough, I said quietly. But not anymore. That evening after returning home, I sat alone in my suite, the trust papers neatly tucked away in a locked drawer. Melanie's voice filtered faintly through the walls as she paced on another call about the party, arguing with a caterer this time. She hadn't noticed that I no longer flinched when I overheard her sharp words. Because now, none of it could touch me. The house may still technically be hers, for now, but not the assets behind it. The safety net was mine again. My financial future belonged solely to me, finally beyond her reach. Later that night, I quietly booked a small apartment at the retirement community across town, one with gardens, privacy, and peace. The freedom felt strange, not triumphant, not yet, but real. I had been so entangled in Melanie's world for so long that I'd almost forgotten what freedom tasted like. For years, my identity was tied to being the fixer, the provider, the silent anchor. She'd come to believe that I was incapable of stepping back, that I needed her, when in truth, it was the other way around. Soon, she would learn how much. As I sat there in the soft glow of my bedside lamp, I whispered to myself words I hadn't dared say out loud in years. Being alone is better than being used. And this time, I meant it. The confrontation didn't come during one of her dramatic outbursts. It came in the stillness, when Melanie realized she was losing control. She cornered me late one afternoon, 2 days before her grand dinner party. Her voice was falsely sweet, but the panic was no longer hiding behind her eyes. "Mother, I've been thinking," she started carefully. "Maybe we were both a little emotional before, but the bank's been calling again, and this time, it's urgent. If you could just make this month's payment, just to stabilize things, then we can sit down and figure it out together." I met her gaze, my face calm, steady. The words were already rehearsed inside me. "No, Melanie," I said softly. "I won't be calling the bank." Her smile faltered. "What?" "I won't be managing your obligations anymore. Not your mortgage. Not your debts. Not your life." The air between us thickened instantly. Her voice sharpened. "Mother, don't be ridiculous. You've always handled this. You're acting completely unreasonable." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small flash drive. I held it up between us, watching the flicker of confusion flash in her eyes. "What's that?" she asked, suddenly wary. I set it down gently on the table between us. "Something your son sent me." She froze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her voice dropped, barely a whisper. "Tyler?" I nodded. "Yes, he recorded you." She paled. "I heard every word, Melanie," I continued, my tone still soft, still unshaken. "The things you said, the laughter, the way you called me dead weight in front of your friends." Her mouth opened as if to deny it, but no words came. "I raised you, Melanie," I whispered. "I sacrificed more than you will ever know. And still, you stood there and mocked me. Used me." She finally found her voice, panicked now. "It was a joke. Just stupid banter. You're taking this completely out of context." I tilted my head. "No, Melanie. You made yourself very clear." I stood up slowly, watching her eyes dart as her mind raced to regain footing. But there was nothing for her to grasp. "I've made arrangements," I said softly. "The financial support ends now. I've secured my future. I'll be moving out soon. You won't have to carry your dead weight any longer." Her lips trembled. "Mother, wait, this is insane." But I was already walking past her, calm and quiet, as the words she once so carelessly tossed around finally settled over her. The weight was off her now, because I had lifted it myself. Melanie didn't let me leave the conversation so easily. By the time I reached the entryway, her voice tore through the house, shrill and cracked. "You're abandoning me? After everything I've done for you?" she screamed. I stopped at the door and turned slowly. The neighbors would hear her now, the mask she so carefully wore for them slipping completely. "What you've done for me?" I repeated softly, almost curious at how quickly she rewrote history. "Melanie, I saved this house when you were drowning in debt. I paid every bill while you played hostess for people who barely remember your name." Her face flushed, but I could see the wild panic flickering in her eyes. "You can't just leave me like this," she shouted. "How am I supposed to handle all of this? The mortgage? The taxes? Tyler?" I held my gaze steady. "You've always told everyone that you're the one managing everything. That I'm just here, quietly fading. Isn't that how you described it? Dead weight that wouldn't be around much longer?" Her mouth opened and closed like she couldn't catch her breath. Her hands clenched into fists. "You're spiteful," she spat. "Cruel. After everything. You'll regret this when you have nothing and nobody." I shook my head. "No, Melanie, that's been your greatest mistake all along. You assumed I had nothing because I never bragged. Because I never flaunted my sacrifices the way you flaunt your borrowed luxury." Her voice cracked further, nearly hysterical now. "You don't even have anyone but me. Who else do you think will take care of you? You'll come crawling back when you're sick and old." She stopped when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted us. "Tyler's car." I saw his face as he stepped out, instantly reading the tension pouring from inside. His eyes shifted between us, taking in his mother's flushed face and my calm posture. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. Melanie's voice dropped to a venomous whisper as he approached. "You're poisoning my own son against me." I leaned in close, my voice barely above a breath. "No, Melanie. You did that yourself." Tyler walked past his mother and stood quietly beside me. Not touching, not speaking, but choosing. Silently, firmly. Melanie stared at him, her composure unraveling further. Tyler, you don't understand what she's doing. She's manipulating you." He finally spoke, his voice calm. "I see a lot more than you think, Mom." Her face crumpled for a brief moment, a flash of real vulnerability beneath the rage. But then her pride swallowed it whole again. I opened the door and stepped outside into the warm afternoon air. Tyler followed. Neither of us looked back. The neighbors watched from their porches as Melanie's voice echoed behind us. Desperate, furious, unraveling. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. That evening, the house sat behind us like a closed chapter. I drove Tyler to a small diner a few blocks from my future apartment. We sat across from each other, our meals untouched. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken things finally surfacing. Tyler broke first. "Grandma," he said quietly, "I've been wanting to talk to you for a while now." I met his eyes, waiting. "I know what she's like," he continued. "I've known for years. The way she treats you, it's not right. And I've let it go on too long without saying anything." His voice wavered with guilt, but I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. "You're still young. You shouldn't have had to carry that burden." He shook his head. "That's not an excuse. I should have stood up to her sooner, especially after I recorded that video. I didn't know what to do with it. But when I saw your face when you watched it, I realized I had to give it to you." A lump formed in my throat. My grandson, the very reason I endured so much, had finally seen it for what it was. "I'm proud of you," I whispered, "and I'm grateful." Then his next words caught me off guard. "I don't want to live with her anymore," he said, voice stronger now. "Not after this. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I want to come live with you." The weight of his request pressed hard against my chest, not from burden, but from the rawness of hearing someone choose me. Not out of obligation, out of love. "I'll have my own place soon," I said softly. "It won't be as big as that house. It won't be what you're used to." He smiled, a real, soft smile that reminded me so much of when he was little. "I don't care. I want peace, and I want to be with someone who respects me, and who I respect." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had cried enough over that house. This was something else entirely. "You can stay with me, Tyler," I said firmly. "But there are conditions." He nodded quickly, eager. "Anything. No financial help to your mother. None. I won't allow her to guilt you into paying her debts or pulling you back into her spiral." His shoulders relaxed as if he'd been holding that fear tightly. Agreed. For the first time in years, I felt something new. Control. Not over someone else, over my own life. We left the diner together, stepping into the cool evening air. The world felt wide again. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Within days of me pulling away, the phone calls started flooding Melanie's life like a dam finally bursting. It began with the mortgage company. Without my payments, she was months behind and never realized it. The polite reminders quickly escalated into stern warnings. Then came the credit cards, calls from collectors, letters marked urgent, piling on the marble foyer table she once boasted about. She tried to juggle it at first, dipping into whatever shallow savings she had, using one credit card to pay off another, playing her usual game of appearances. But it didn't last. The creditors didn't care how many dinner parties she hosted or what designer shoes she wore. They wanted real money, and Melanie had none without me. The friend she once charmed so effortlessly started to drift. At first, it was excuses, then silence. Eventually, she stopped receiving invitations altogether. The lavish dinner party she planned went on, but guests canceled one by one. Those who still came wore thin smiles, sensing the tension behind her desperate hospitality. I heard all this from neighbors and small whispers around town. Melanie still hadn't confronted me again. She was too busy fighting fires she had never learned to extinguish herself. One afternoon, as Tyler and I unpacked boxes in my modest but peaceful new apartment, I noticed him pause, phone in hand. "She keeps calling me," he said quietly. "Multiple times a day now." I watched him carefully. "And what do you want to do?" He exhaled slowly. "Ignore it. I don't owe her the life she wants to live anymore." I nodded, my chest tightening with a bittersweet ache. My grandson had finally grown into the man I hoped he would become: strong, clear-eyed, and unwilling to be manipulated. The apartment was small, but it was mine. No one barged into my suite with demands. No one controlled my choices. Every piece of furniture, every bill, every key, it belonged to me. As I set another box on the kitchen counter, Tyler turned and asked, "Do you regret it, Grandma?" Walking away, I looked around the space, breathing in the unfamiliar but calming quiet. "No," I said softly. "Not for 1 second." Melanie, in her panic, still believed this was temporary. She thought I would come running back once things got hard. But she never understood. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I was done. And being done is freedom. Weeks passed. The storm I left behind still raged, but I no longer lived beneath its clouds. Melanie tried every angle. Calls, texts, even showing up at my new apartment once. All crocodile tears and rehearsed guilt. I didn't answer the door. I didn't return her calls. She wasn't coming for reconciliation. She was coming for rescue. Rescue I no longer offered. But I also no longer carried rage. Not anymore. Anger is a weight too, and I had carried enough weight for a lifetime. One evening, Tyler and I sat quietly on the balcony as the city lights blinked alive around us. He glanced at me, his voice soft. "Do you still hate her?" I exhaled slowly. The question settled between us like a long-awaited visitor. "No," I said, "I don't hate her. She is who she is. And I forgive her." He looked at me, surprised. "Forgiving her doesn't mean forgetting," I continued. "It means I refuse to let her live in my mind anymore. She doesn't owe me. I don't owe her. The debt, emotional or otherwise, is paid. Completely." Tyler nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You're stronger than I am." "No." I smiled softly. "Just older." I sipped my tea, feeling the cool breeze against my face. The bitterness that once sat heavy in my chest was gone. In its place was quiet. Not emptiness. Peace. I gave my daughter everything I had. And now, I've given myself everything she never could. Freedom. Melanie will struggle with her consequences. That's hers to carry now. I, finally, carry nothing.